Hi, this is Elizabeth Estelle, Homeschool Christian Mom, and I'm so glad that you're here with me today and that we can talk about this biblical worldview. I'm using this text, Biblical Worldview, Creation, Fall, and Redemption from BJU Press Homeschool. It's an excellent resource for your high school student. And my husband even asked me, well, why are you talking so much about this? And the reason is I was very motivated when I went to the Foundation Summit to take our viewpoint, make sure I know it, and be able to explain it to others in a gracious and kind way, and be ready to engage the culture. It's just sad for my husband and I to see how many of our Christian young people are leaving the church, who are not following by going into Christian universities, or they're going to secular universities and then saying, I just want to live like the world. This Christianity thing, I tried and it wasn't for me. And we're very sad to see that. So what have we been missing teaching our children? And one thing we're talking about here in chapter 2 is that we have tended to divide the sacred and the secular. And so we say, it's called the two-story view. So on the bottom story, we have politics and science and math and reasoning, and we're very concerned. We know what those things are. We can reason with those things. And on the upper story, we have religion and our values and our morality. And we say these are two different areas, and we don't want them to mix. They're going to stay separate. There's not a stairway up and down for those, or if there's a stairway, it's a private stairway in the back, and you don't need to see my religion. And so we have separated this. And so part of the problem with that is that God hasn't separated that. He makes everything work together. And we've been intimidated in a way from saying that we're taking a position on the Bible, and why can't we just separate these things and look at science and math one way and religion and morality the other way? Well, one thing that you have probably seen, excuse me a second, is the problem with that is Christians are not separating religion and morality. And what they're saying is, well, I know my Bible, and I'm going to live a promiscuous lifestyle or an immoral lifestyle anyway. And very sad for us to see how many Christians have not taken a biblical stand on their purity. So what do? We've been intimidated in a way. We say, in the book, they use a playground image. Well, if you'll keep your religion over there, and keep science over here, we'll let you play nice, and we'll let you keep your lunch, and we won't bother you. But that's really not what happens. As kind as some of these secularists are, they're still taking away our argument. And one thing else they've done is change the definition of tolerance. It used to be that if you had a certain viewpoint that you held very strongly, you could have an open debate with someone else who had a viewpoint that was very strong, and go back and forth and talk about the merits of one side and the other side, and that was okay. But now the definition for tolerance is sort of like every viewpoint, it has equal merit except religion, so you can't argue from that one. And if you try to take a stand of just one viewpoint, you're not being inclusive enough, and we can't tolerate you. And so there's this sort of, whoops, guess the pie is getting ready pretty soon. The cyclical thinking that doesn't allow the Bible to be introduced, or faith to be introduced. And so we've been taken out of that whole argument. Well, what should we do about that? Christians generally who take this two-story view do it with good motivation. They're not trying to be, they're trying to get along with the culture. They do it in order to protect the sacred things they value. And they think that by keeping their religion away, they'll have some more influence on these other people. And there is a lot of moral corruption in the world that we're trying to protect our children from. maybe we can keep ourselves from not being tainted by the world. But what really has happened is somehow the world is still very attractive. Temptation is still very tempting. I don't know if you know that sign language sign, but the devil is tapping you on the shoulder and saying, hey, try this. Temptation is still very tempting, and we're losing people to the world. Their hearts are not decided that they're going to stick with the Bible and take things on faith. And it's we need to address these things. Now, this textbook has a lot of vocabulary. It has a lot of big ideas in it, but it's an extremely well-written resource that you can use with your high school students to talk through these issues with them. And maybe you're a person that has a little difficulty bringing up some of these things with your student. This book has a good background. It has a good way of bringing up difficult issues so that you can talk to your student about that and say, hey, have you heard this? Have you seen this? What are your thoughts about it? How can we address it with your friends? How can you give your testimony to your friends in such a way that you can show them that God is able to meet your spiritual needs and that they have presuppositions too that maybe they weren't aware of? And just because Christians say, hey, I take a stand on the Bible and faith, doesn't mean they're not taking a stand on what they believe and faith in that. It just means we're right up front about it. And so it may lead to persecution here. It may lead to at least some uncomfortable situations or conflicts. But we need to be willing and ready to explain to people why we can't take this two-story viewpoint. God's made everything to work together as one, and when we try to separate, we do harm to that. So we have our upper story and our lower story. The upper story is the private sphere, and the lower story is the public sphere. And we want to say, okay, we can keep these separate, but God hasn't made us like that. We're all together one, body, soul, and spirit, and we need to put that all together and be prepared, our whole body, soul, and spirit, to talk to people about the Lord. And I was very encouraged today to hear my friend Joyce has been so faithful in talking to her cousin David, who is Jewish, about his need for salvation. And almost to the point where I thought, Joyce, you ought to back off. He's not interested. But Joyce is like, no, he needs salvation. He's getting older. I need to talk to him. And the other day, guess who called her? Her cousin David is concerned about some things that he's seeing in the world and wanted to talk to Joyce about salvation. He didn't get saved, but he was open to it. He knew he could talk to Joyce about it because she's been very open and upfront with him about his spiritual needs. So I'm sure you have people that you're concerned about too and their spiritual needs. So how are you going to address that? If you're hesitant or you're not sure, you can get a book like this and talk about these things and learn how to engage people in a very gracious and kind way. So we do things and we're kind to people and we read our Bible and we pray and we protect our children, but perhaps we've been protecting them and not preparing them. And so this whole week, I've tried to talk about having a biblical worldview, knowing what you believe, and being prepared so that you can have your children prepared to engage the world in a godly and proper manner. And it doesn't mean that we won't say things wrong or do things wrong, but it gives us a good way to be prepared to talk to people. And it gives us a good way to talk to our children about these things that they are going to come into conflict with. They are going to have to address these where they work and live. And I think you might be surprised how much your children will be glad to have this venue that they can talk to you about these difficult cultural problems today. 40 years ago, we wouldn't have dreamed we'd have to be talking to people about gender identity or even maybe the sanctity of marriage. And yet those are big issues today, and we need to have the answers for them. And we need to be sure by faith that God has the answer in his Bible, and he's able to stand up to the questions of the day. They're not really new questions, are they? Sodom and Gomorrah was a long time ago. There were people a long time ago that were doing bad things that God had to judge. And we can see through the ages his narrative. There was the creation, there was the fall, and God's work of redeeming mankind. It's a multi-generational task, and God is still in the business of saving people and preparing his people to influence the culture and be a light and salt in the world. And I think that if you are looking for a good textbook or resource, that you will be very happy with this. There is the student book, there's an activity page, and the teacher's book. So you have all those three things together. Now, I'm very happy with Bob Jones University Press Homeschool Materials, BJU Press Homeschool Materials. They use this biblical worldview all throughout all their books. They set a good foundation. But it's nice to have this all in one book that you can talk to your high school student about these issues and have them be prepared. And the homeschoolers I work with know that I'm very adamant about being ready and having your students ready so that when they clash with the world, they can have that good biblical foundation, and it won't rock their foundation, that they can change their little part of the world and be the salt and light that they need to be. So if you have some more questions about that, please put them in the comments. Thank you for taking the time to look at the video today. I'm so glad you did, and I hope that as we go on in the future with these different worldview topics and Facebook Lives, that you'll see the value of being prepared and knowing where your faith is grounded, and not just saying, well, I don't know all the answers, but I believe it. It's okay to be prepared and have some answers for people and be able to graciously explain what God has done in your life and what he can do in their lives as well. Thank you so much, and have a good weekend.